everybody. On behalf of the Beatrix Farrand Society, I'd like to welcome you to Garland Farm. We have a very special talk this afternoon. Ms. Roxanne Brouse is here to talk about a monograph that she has written about Beatrix Farrand's work on the carriage roads in Acadia National Park. So we're doing this in honor of the centennial of Acadia National Park, and we're really quite excited about that. Roxanne is a landscape architect, and she currently works with Riley and Associates in Charlottesville, Virginia. So we're really pleased that she's spending the weekend with us here in Maine. She's also done quite a bit of work with the National Park Service in the past as a landscape architect in Washington, D.C. So this work that she's done on the monograph is the first detailed work describing Beatrix Farrand's work on the carriage roads. And she's going to be talking about that and all of Ms. Farrand's work on the carriage roads. We're accepting pre-orders for the book after the show if you're interested in it. And we'll also have it available for, once it's in at Garland Farm. So thank you all very much for coming out here this afternoon. Thank you, Roxanne.
Can you hear me? I eagerly accepted the invitation to come to the Beatrix Farrand Society and talk to you today. Really had not fully grasped the magnitude of the undertaking. As I began pulling text and images together, it dawned on me that this assembled group would be well versed in all things Farrand. But I hope to tell you something today you don't already know. My focus will not be on her well-known commissions, but rather on her life here and her contributions to Acadia National Park. She came here as a young girl about when this drawing was done, and died, of course, here at Garland Farm at 86 years of age. Then she traveled extensively for her work and had offices not only here but in New York and California. It was to Mount Reserve Island that she returned again and again. She knew the island better perhaps than anyone but George Dorr and Johnny Rockefeller Jr. She was told her. Here she is, still a teenager, prepared for a Maine winter outing. Having grown up in North Dakota, it's a fashion statement we're talking about familiar. A picture is worth 1,000 words, but her words also spoke of Maine as home. At the age of 21, her letter to the editor was published in the magazine Garden and Forest. It reveals that her early and careful observation of island plants had already led to some very strongly held opinions about design. The last sentence is particularly endearing. She said, "It will be noticed that only such trees that grow on the coast of Maine are mentioned, as I am most familiar with that part of the country." When she set her cap on a career as a landscape gardener, she dutifully followed the advice of her mentor, Charles Craig Sargent, around the Acadia, and started a journal to record her observations. She titled it Book of Gardening. It includes her notes from trips to Chicago's World Fair, the Arnold Arboretum, the Boston Public Garden, and a grand tour of Europe. But it begins here on Mount Reserve Island. Her first entries are about a trip to Gold Farm and the plant combination she observed there. Her earliest essays also reflected her attachment to this place. Rockefeller, of course, funded Acadia's carriage road system and was personally involved in determining.
Speak up a little bit or change the microphone. It's hard to hear back here.
He was personally involved in determining the routes and destinations. Is that better? No? So, how's that better?
Oh, yeah.
He also asked Farrand for her help. 133 pages of correspondence and notes between them document their collaboration on the carriage roads. He sought and she offered advice not only on the planting along the roadsides and around the bridges and gate lodges, but also on grading and drainage, plants to grow into nurseries, and vistas both near and far. The Millers, William and his son Charles, with their crews, executed the ideas. Both Millers traveled the roads with Farrand and made their own suggestions, though William was her most frequent escort. I would give worlds to know what William Miller looked like, but I have not yet found a picture, so I substituted an image of a plant we hybridized, the Nephrolepis milleri, a fern with finer fronds than the original. And the text in the upper left-hand corner reflects what was shown on the letterhead for Miller Gardens. Betsy Hewlett's recently published article about nurserymen here at the turn of the century revealed much about Miller. After working at the Mount Desert Island Nurseries, he founded Miller Gardens and worked with Rockefeller as an independent contractor for many years. Farrand described him as their honest, Benedict friend. Benedict, as in friend. How did they do it? There are no drawings for the carriage road work. Farrand, usually with Miller, sometimes with Rockefeller, traveled the roads, making notes of her recommendations. These were transcribed, usually in her absence, since she traveled a great deal, and then forwarded to Rockefeller for his review and approval. Because they were transcribed, she is referred to in the third person. It's always Mrs. Farrand. Subsequently, Miller and his crews began the actual planting. Letters between Farrand and Rockefeller also reflect their discussion of various issues related to the roads, such as the grading at the gate lodges or an eroded slope on Sergeant Line. Farrand's keen observation and study of the island, its flora and fauna, prepared her well for her work on the carriage roadsides. Early on, she focused on the island's landscape, studying its rocky ledges, its soils, topography, and the spectrum of plants from the lowly prickly to the stately spruce. She brought all of this information to bear in planning her gardens at Reef Point and other gardens on the island, such as Satterley, and in her work on carriage roads. Farrand is well known for her design of formal estate gardens, but her approach to garden design varied due to the settings and wishes of her clients. There are examples of her work that highlight her talent for designing informal paths that wind through groves and meticulously planned flower beds. They also reflect her approach to the design of the natural landscape, which she eloquently expressed in her essay, The Garden is a Picture, which is illustrated by Henry McCarter. If you've not read this essay, I think it's really a master class on planting design. It's very eloquent. She said, the so-called natural garden is the most difficult to fit in with its surroundings because there is no set line to act as a backbone to the composition, and the whole effect must be obtained from masses of color, contrasting heights, and varieties of texture without any straight lines of useful emphasis. At her home, Reef Point, where she was her own client, grass paths following the contour of the land and aligning with the views led visitors through her arboretum, where she showcased heathers, azaleas, British plants, a collection of bog plants, and plants grown for their own color. She relied heavily on plantings of hemlock, spruce, and pine in groves to serve as background, screens, or to frame views. Her knowledge of Mount Desert Island plants and talent for blending the planned landscape with the natural one served her well in working with Louisa Morgan Satterley on her garden at Braehead, just south of Bell Harbor. We have the Van Herden family to thank for these lovely images. It was the first of her large-scale informal gardens. Over their 23-year collaboration, the structure of the garden remained the same, but the plant combinations changed. Farrand followed her own advice, varying the color, height, and texture of the plants in her combinations. It shares many similarities with her approach at Reef Point, including the same bench and grass paths with the flower beds with a focus on the sea view. Since it was the Satterley summer home, she designed a garden of summer flowering plants. The ingenious move, however, was to locate the garden in an existing clearing in the woods. Access to it was across a rustic wooden bridge at the edge of a birch grove. To jump ahead a little bit, the stone bridges on the carriage roads are the most familiar. But Rockefeller also included wooden bridges, partly because Mrs. Rockefeller liked the sound of the horses' hooves as they crossed. Farrand agreed with using them from time to time, and the most easily reached are those at the north end of Eagle Lake at the crossing of Duck Brook. She did, however, suggest that Rockefeller not use rustic logs or railings as he had planned, but rather the adds hewn timbers.
Roxanne, I wonder if we might include the location of the
How was that? Is that better? Better?
Yeah.
So she wanted Rockefeller to use as hewn railings rather than the rustic ones, and she said they were entirely appropriate to country bridges, as they have been used for a great many hundreds of years. She allowed us, however, the rustic ones would look shabby and unkempt after a few years. She perhaps suggested this because of her experience at Satterley. This is her drawing for one Satterley bridge showing rustic railings. We also have a picture taken by Frances Benjamin Johnston showing the bridge. Her skill at blending edges also served her well in her work along the carriage roads. She based her plant selections on the trees and shrubs existing in the area, so the new plants would not stand out as exotic or foreign to their environment, and arranged them in a manner that reflected their natural pattern of growth. She also worked to smooth rough edges. For example, she identified the right plants to hang over the edge of Aunt Betty's pond to make the transition from the pond to the road that ran along its eastern edge. And she noted that more planting should be done on a slide slope to bring the edge of the woods closer to the road. Farrand, with her encyclopedic knowledge of what grew rare on the island, did a masterful job of planting design on the carriage roads. She advised adding more of the trees or shrubs that grew naturally in the area. And she combined plants with great skill and used them the way they would be found in nature. But her notes also reflect her overall aesthetic as she painted a sequence of pictures along the roads. Instead of keeping the edges of the road fairly evenly planted and a continuous line of trees, she said to keep occasional spots open in which clumps of shrubs may be set out, because she wanted to vary the road planting in height and quality and type of material, since those are the variations usually found in natural growth. One theme runs through her notes. She fussed about William Miller's tendency to plant trees and shrubs too regularly, becoming less diplomatic as time passed. She said, "It seems very difficult for Mr. Miller to see that his foremen do not sprinkle the trees primly and almost unvaryingly straight line." Farrand used the words heal, clothe, and furnish to describe her planting strategy along the carriage roads, as evidenced in these excerpts from her notes. She primarily relied on a native palette of plants as she worked to knit the construction into the surrounding landscape. And she noted that Rockefeller also wanted to use native species in considerable quantities. That doesn't mean she did not make an occasional exception. After she had suggested a planting of Rosa ruiginosa, or sweetbriar, she was asked if it was native. She investigated and concluded it was a European specimen, but that it naturalized around old houses throughout New England and was therefore entirely appropriate to use. And she did not always look to create an indigenous scene, recommending the planting of pine to give a splendid Chinese effect to a prospect. She used plants along the carriage roads to enhance and frame distant views of the mountains or sea, as well as near views of the bridges or features, such as Witch Hole or Gilmore Meadow. She also employed them to screen objectionable views, such as quarry sites and adjacent motor roads. Another planting priority was reforesting denuded slopes or scars made by construction, as was enhancing the roadsides and the experience of traveling the carriage roads by creating natural plant associations appropriate to the landscape setting. Beaver Pool, I think, is the best example of her work along carriage roads. Bubble Brook connects Bubble Pond to Eagle Lake. It's scarcely more than half a mile long, but the carriage road that circles Eagle Lake crosses it. This crossing, as well as the treatment of the pool just east of it, generated much discussion over a 2-year period. First, Rockefeller and Farrand met in person to discuss several issues, including spanning the brook. After consulting with his engineer, Paul Simpson, he decided to build a triple culvert of weathered stone with 3 openings to regulate the flow into a small pool, which he designed as a spawning area for trout. This was part of Rockefeller's larger plan to eliminate beavers from the island, which I understand he was not successful. He decided not to finish the stone on the east side of the culvert, which faced the beaver swamp, as he called it, and asked if she felt the effect of the semi-faced material would be sufficiently good. By return letter, she communicated her complete agreement with this approach. That decision made, their discussion turned for planting. Her initial recommendations, made in October 1929, shortly before the stock market crash, suggest a complete understanding of the topography, the drainage, and the plant's cultural requirements. In the triangle created by the intersection of Bubble Pond and Eagle Lake carriage roads, she suggested high-branched maples, winterberry, and other shrubs. I took this picture yesterday. The maples are still there, but not the understory. Her notes refer to various triangles a lot, and I think restoring the triangles would make a good, discrete project. On the bank of the road south of the swale and pool, she was adamant that only low planting should be used to keep the low, swale-like effect opening into the beaver pool. She planned a prodigious variety, both for the pool and the adjacent meadow. She suggested iris along the stream and occasionally at the pool edges, with scattered groups of loosely planted black and red elder. Near the pool below the culvert, she suggested winterberry and red elder with a few black ones, which would overhang the pond and feel it appear at home. For the foresight of the pool, she pulled out her wish list. And I saw my first meadow blue on Sunday, so I had to add this picture. And I particularly tickled about her reference to Turk's cap lily. She said it should be tucked in under the elderberry. She was also keen on planting swamp rose, as it was an opportunity to use this rose in its natural habitat. Her last initial recommendation was to plant sweet gale on the banks of the pool, as it would do well, even if flooded. Farrand and Miller returned to the pool in the spring of 1931 to stake the locations of hundreds of plants. Additional shrubs included chokecherry, hazels, white flowered and red elders, and witch hazel. She noted that the witch hazel in particular would make a fine display and would be likely to thrive in this soil and exposure, and the witch hazels with their late autumn blossoms would be an attractive feature. Managing expectations, she ended her notes to Rockefeller with this admonition. From the list given, it seems as though a forest had been set out, and Mrs. Farrand trusts that Mr. Rockefeller will not be disappointed when he sees how little effect the planting will make for the next year or two. On her next visit 3 months later, she was pleased with what she saw and concluded the border of elders with the lobelias and pickerel weed should make this place a really beautiful one. And she let Rockefeller know that the pool had withstood some heavy rains, and she had seen large trout along with a myriad of small ones, proof that the whole arrangement of stones and fall were suitable for spawning fish. Along the carriage road, she had her tried and true plant palette. And a plant list can document those used by Farrand, but it doesn't make explicit the ones she wrote on. Her notes do. She refers to her favorite clematis and speaks of keeping huckleberry in mind whenever it is available. And she and Rockefeller discussed how much she loved wild cherries and shadowblow in the spring. Farrand described the native hazel as an attractive shrub growing in somewhat shaded thickets, and encouraged Miller to pursue native hop hornbeam, Australia, as it is an uncommon tree, quote, charming in its slim growth and adding variety to a plantation. She also wanted to use dwarf scrub oak where possible because it grew on Dog Mountain, and she suggested the jack pine because she knew it grew vigorously on Scooted Point and also in Sheltered Hollow on the southeast slope of Blue Mountain. She said, it's not a common tree, but it is interesting botanically and might be worth using in a few groups. Chokecherry she described as a small tree, pretty when flowering and loved by birds. Clearly, high bush blueberry is one of her most favorite. She said, it would be wise to try some of the high bush blueberries. The shrub is magnificent in its late autumn coloring, clean and attractive in summer, and if none is available on the island, it might be imported as it is exceedingly hardy. Evergreen choices most often include pines, spruces, and hemlocks. Also frequently mentioned are elderberries, blueberries, and birches. For masses of low plantings along the road, she most often chose gervilla, blackberries, dewberries, creepers, sweet fern, wild roses, and of course, her favorite clematis. As you have no doubt noticed, the phrase, her favorite clematis, comes up a lot in the road notes. I feel obliged to report that there is a controversy regarding her favorite plant. After going over these notes again and again, I would say clematis. However, in the current newsletter of the Beatrix Farrand Society, it is reported by Dr. Peterson that her favorite flower was Linnaeus borealis. She grew it at Reef Point and next to her door at Garland Farm. One particular roadside issue preoccupied Farrand and Rockefeller over the course of the carriage road construction, and that's planting of coping stones. Rockefeller's father, and then Rockefeller himself, created a system of carriage roads at their Forest Hills estate in Ohio, and also at Mechanical Hills in New York. They used coping stones as guardrails, and to soften their appearance, planted around them heavily. He employed the same techniques on the Mount Desert Island carriage roads, and enlisted Farrand's aid in planting them in addition. She makes countless references in her notes directing William Miller to plant the coping stones as quickly as possible with such low-growing material as blackberries and clematis. In a letter to her, Rockefeller referred to the clematis as the little vine that grows so fast along the roads. Farrand worked with Rockefeller and William Miller to identify areas on the Rockefeller property to grow seedlings. She provided a list for road planting and lobbied repeatedly for stocks of oak, clematis, hemlock, and arborvitae. Rather than identifying one area as a nursery, Miller created plantations of individual species where they could be grown in situations suited to their cultural requirements. For example, birches were grown in the meadow near the boathouse of Long Pond. Pitch and jack pines constituted the bulk of the nursery planting, and the demand for them remained constant. In 1932, she reported that 2,000 or 3,000 pines crowded the nursery and needed to be set out. Both Miller and Farrand also made special requests. She recorded their mutual desire for a hemlock nursery. She said, "Mr. Rockefeller will be spoken to with regard to this, as hemlocks are among the most desirable and uncommon trees to use in places suitable for their growth. One position in which hemlocks are now growing vigorously is on the northeast end of Eagle Lake." 6 months later, she added arborvitae to the list and said she felt it quite important to get these little trees established in increasing quantities where soil and other conditions are sympathetic. We also know from Farrand's notes that Rockefeller's nurseries included hazel and hamamelis and stalks of red and blackberry elder. The list of plants for road planting that she supplied at his request remains to be rediscovered. In addition to providing a clear record of planting and vista clearing for the roads, Farrand's notes provide insights into the island history, its flora and fauna, and scenery, as well as her experience living there. Her road notes reflect the attention she paid to her surroundings. At various times, she records the presence of partridges and deer, worry over an infestation of pine vista rust, and the sites of an old pig pen, a burned shop, and a winter landing strip around Eagle Lake that prevented extensive planting there. Most enchanting, though, are her descriptions of the landscape through which she traveled. On various October days, she rode along the road connecting Aunt Betty's Pond to the Jordan Sargent Mountain Road. She described what she was seeing, and seemed especially fond of the wooden bridges. It was also noticed how particularly charming the narrow winding road was, leading over its many bridges and up through the hardwoods. The bridges, simple and pleasant, the soil remarkably fertile and rich, and the surrounding wood in apparently excellent condition. The coloring of the hardwood trees was magnificent, and the glimpses from the road winding up from the brook were admirable. The sun shone among the bare branches of the trees, and a number of small fires filled the air with pleasant perfume and blue haze. And after a patch of weather, she added, the 2 waterfalls of Chasm Brook and Waterfall Bridge were at their best, foaming masses of white water of much greater volume than Mrs. Farrand had previously seen. 5 deer were noticed in the course of this crowd. Rockefeller planned and built the carriage roads north and west of Bar Harbor in 1929. The 1926 path map for the island depicts the rabbit-worn roads and paths that existed in this area when he began. Some of these roads and paths became the carriage roads, and others were abandoned. This particular route exemplifies all the ways she used plants to accomplish her overall objectives. Her work was destroyed in the 1997 fire. With her detailed recommendations available for both planting and vistas, this area would be an ideal candidate for restoration. What's growing now is what has grown up naturally on its own and does not reflect the artful setting she worked to create. Although I walked the loop this morning, I found plants familiar there and used in the way she would have. planted in masses and overhanging the pond. Here's a tantalizing tidbit of just the plants you might have seen in the early 1940s over the course of the year. The white flowers of witherod and yellow flowers of uvula in late spring, the summer blossoms of roses and fragrant clematis from April to October. The highlights of autumn would include the fall color of witherod and uvula, and winter would feature the ornamental berries of witherod and elderberry, and the red drupes of deciduous mountain holly and the ornamental seedlings of clematis. In 1931, Rockefeller hired Grover Atterbury to complete plans and specifications for the Brown Mountain and Jordan Pond gate lodges, and asked Farrand for help as well. She was a fan of the buildings and wrote Rockefeller that she had happened to pass the Jordan Pond gatehouse and that she thought it harmonious and pleasant. At Jordan Pond, she recommended that grading difficulties resulting from the need to raise the building to accommodate the utilities be solved by building a rough terrace supported by stones similar to those used on the roads. Since this approach made it possible to save the trees between the building and the road, she deemed it the most expedient solution. Those trees are gone now, of course, but the wall is still there. At the Brown Mountain Lodge, she suggested using available surplus soil to construct a bank of earth for planting, which today would be called a berm. That she wanted it to run parallel to the road. When she met with Atterbury's associates in New York, they agreed with all her recommendations. Rockefeller did not. He vetoed the grading scheme for the Brown Mountain Lodge because he thought it would seriously interfere with the view of the gate lodge group from the road, which he said to him was the most interesting and attractive. Farrand subsequently agreed with his alternative to dispose of the excess soil, since he did not like what she called her camel's hump. Unlike the Jordan Pond Road where the trees had disappeared, trees at the Brown Mountain Gate Lodge completely obscured from the road now. This is an earlier picture. She did not prepare planting plans for the lodges, but rather staked the plants in the field with William Miller. The Gate Lodge correspondence highlights Farrand's talent for grading, her professionalism with both clients and colleagues, and her status as a resident downeaster. She ended a letter to Rockefeller in New York from Reed Point, saying, "I hope I shall have the pleasure of seeing you in New York before you start down here." In 1928, Rockefeller suggested to the acting director of the National Park Service that he enlist her aid at the Bubble Pond Bridge. He said, "Mrs. Farrand, the landscape architect here, is intensely interested in park matters and also in bridges. It may be that you could arrange with her to act for the government in carrying out this bridge construction, although I'm not sure she would be willing to take on so large a job as that." By the time Farrand began working with Rockefeller on park matters, most of the bridges were already built. As the bridges became more elaborate, the impact of construction on the land increased as did public scrutiny. While the public generally supported Rockefeller's road and bridge building, opponents were vocal. As with the roads, the correspondence between Farrand and Rockefeller often reflected their desire to soften the impact of bridge construction as soon as possible after it was finished. Their larger purpose, however, was aesthetic. They wanted the bridges to be artfully enhanced by using trees and shrubs to ground them in the landscape or frame the view with them. Rather than talk about all the bridge work in detail, I will focus on three: Duck Brook, the Stanley Brook, and the Jordan Pond Road underpass. The sequence of notes regarding planting at Duck Brook Bridge provides a measure of Farrand's attention to detail as well as her ultimate satisfaction with the work. Her notes span a 12-month period and include Rockefeller's comments from a trip to the bridge they made together. This is an old picture of where they started. She wanted to add a couple of pines and a massive viburnum to the north end of the bridge, but wanted to make sure they were kept somewhat in the background and not allowed to intrude in the foreground of the picture, where they would close in a direct view down into the stream. Farrand also wanted to leave open views of the triple arches from the approach roads. She recommended low plantings of uvula, wild roses, and sweet fern, and further suggested groups of blackberries or dewberries along the roadsides near the bridge. Miller and Farrand assessed the planting holes on 2 separate occasions. She pronounced the layout as staked in the field seemed likely to screen the abutments successfully and attractively, and that the great granite wall of the west side of the bridge would be framed in verdure. Her final assessment came a month later. The planting around Duckbrook Bridge was thought admirable by Mrs. Farrand, and to vastly improve the framing of the bridge, particularly the southwest portion. A group of pines has been planted fairly near the further steps leading to the lower path, and helps mask the expansive masonry at this point. Other deciduous material has been planted in this neighborhood and will, during the course of the next season or two, make a very good frame and effect. Rockefeller's road building began on his property surrounding the Eyrie and ended with the loop around Day Mountain. Connecting these two circuits required a section of road, but one that also crossed the existing Jordan Pond Road and the new Stanley Brook Road, and therefore required two new bridges. Since the bridge at Jordan Pond carried the motor road over the carriage road, the underside is completely faced with stone, while the deck above remains unadorned. Again, Rockefeller looked to Farrand for advice regarding the surrounding landscape. She suggested planting trees at the tops of the banks and using low plants at the bottom to create the illusion of depth. To accomplish this objective, she heavily planted the banks with Scotch pine, recommending they be planted with occasional white pine, staghorn sumac, Japanese maple, Japanese barberry, and common barberry, and sweetbriar roses. At the bottom of the banks on top of the retaining walls, she wanted Virginia creeper, bittersweet, and clematis planted in masses to make a tumbled mass at the bottom of the bank, falling over the wall. In addition, she advised that a few American and European mountain ash should be planted to taper the evergreen plantations to the natural woods. Here it is today. There is still a ravine effect, but the tumbled mass at the bottom of the bank is lost. The Stanley Brook Bridge, built 2 years later, not only carried the carriage road across the new motor road, it also spanned the Stanley Brook and a trail, a popular route from Seal Harbor to the Jordan Pond House. Planting opportunities in the spaces around the three arches were limited, but Farrand pressed on with the work and admired the results. In writing to Rockefeller, she noted that the planting of the new Stanley Brook Bridge had, quote, improved the whole neighborhood. The pines have quite transformed the slopes, and the big groups of sumac near the bridge, cedars north of the bridge, and shrubs on the spaces between the trail, the bridle path, and the large road have very much furnished the whole scheme. She added that both she and Charles Miller agreed that planting 2 maples on the north side of the bridge and 2 on the south side would materially add to the attractiveness of the bridge arch itself. Thanks to the snow highlighting the branches against the shadowed face of the bridge, the maples can be seen in this photo, along with other plants that indeed furnish the whole scheme. A skilled plantswoman as well as an artist, she noted that some grading would be necessary to provide sufficient root line for the 4 trees, the 4 maples, but felt that this tree planting would be most desirable, as there was no other way of veiling or framing the big arch. This photo shows their growth a few years later, and here they are still today. It's clear that Farrand carefully studied Rockefeller's bridges, applying her prodigious skills to soften or enhance their appearance, and employing her beloved Mount Desert Island plants to both heal the scars of construction and knit the seed back into the native landscape. In an early essay, she wrote about an ivy-covered English bridge, which rings true for any bridge at Acadia as well. She said, "It is made from the stone of the country, and the native plants grow about it as familiarly as though it were a boulder playfully deposited there by nature in that age." Oops, sorry. I missed that. That's the English bridge. The landscape of Mount Desert Island is beyond compare, with its high granite hills, rocky shores, and clear lakes. Waterfalls, marshes, fjords, deep green forests, and an incredible array of plants and associated wildlife. Farrand wrote, quote, "It is not surprising that the island should have been known and loved by thousands of people who have come to find refreshment in its quickening air, blended from sea and forest. Nothing worth seeing escaped her attention, especially since she advocated easier access to beautiful spots, which prior to the construction of the carriage roads could only be seen after what Farrand called painful struggle. Farrand's knowledge of the island allowed her to bring out the best in every scene along the roads. For example, she suggested that no great change was needed in the old swamp near Aunt Betty's pond, because the charm of this scene is its undisturbed qualitude. In her mind's eye, she also saw the potential of a marsh nearby, which she thought might have been a former lake. saying this space may eventually be a beautiful position to grow massive azaleas and mullein. Okay, this is just to see if I fail to keep your attention. This is not me. But I have lived for over 30 years now in the shadow of Thomas Jefferson's Monticello Mountain. I have learned there are very few subjects that cannot be addressed with a quote from TJ. In this case, in addition to agreeing with Farrand's assessment regarding it as a fine art, he also had a similar view of vistas. At the top of this mountain, he had prospects at every point of the compass, but he thought it better if the views would occur between thickets to offer shifting scenes as you advance on your way. Farrand recorded a similar sentiment in a letter to Rockefeller in the spring of 1930. She said, "You will, I am sure, be interested and thrilled when you see the thinning, when you see the thinning of vistas which Mr. Miller has cut on the Paradise Hill Road. They seem to me to be done with great taste and restraint, as one is conscious of a succession of changing vistas, separated by groups of fine trees, and an infinitely more attractive series of views than would have been the case had Mr. Miller slashed trees and made one panoramic expanse." Her correspondence with Rockefeller and notes taken her trips along the roads include remarks about vistas both near and far. The numbers on this map correspond to her recorded references to establishing views just mentioned in the Paradise Hill area, and also her notes regarding her vigilance in maintaining them. On one excursion with Charles Miller in 1934, she noted that there were a good many places where a small amount of cutting would keep open certain vistas created only a year or two ago. Farrand was particularly concerned about maintaining William Miller's admirably cut vistas looking over Frenchman's Bay and Paradise Hill, and recommended the removal of poplar, oak, and birch sprouts. She planned the closer views just as carefully, such as those of Witch Hole or Half Moon Pond, noting that an attractive view of the pond should be kept particularly open using materials such as wild roses and clematis in order not to increase. Farrand never charged for the countless hours she spent traveling the road, making recommendations. She did, however, send invoices about every 6 months. Anxious that her work be recognized for the professional contribution it was, Rockefeller understood the significance of her donation, often and sincerely thanking her. "I have driven and ridden a number of times since reaching Seal Arbor," he said. "This is just a note to tell you how pleased I am with the planting insofar as I have seen it. You cannot know what a relief it is to me to have you giving attention to these matters, for it had become quite a burden to me to try to keep up with them on all the roads. Then, too, what you do is so much better than anything I could do. Please accept this renewed assurance of my deep gratitude to you for the very real service you are rendering to the National Park, and also to me." Her response during one such exchange of letters never fails to tickle me. She said, "It is pleasant to know that we may still cooperate on the roadside work here on the island. I enjoy it as much as any work I do anywhere, and have all the pleasure of a dog carrying a newspaper, as it makes me feel of some little use." John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave us a great gift, and he rarely asked Beatrix Farrand to help him put the bow on. Their collaboration, along with aid from the Millers, still gives us pleasant outings to Mount Desert Island's most scenic spots. Farrand was proud of her island, and also took a little bit of Mount Desert Island with her on her travels. This, as you know, is Dunbar Notes, and the Blisses donated the greater part of it to Harvard, but the small piece along the stream and at the bottom of the hill they gave to the National Park Service. As these pictures indicate, Farrand's work here reflects her work at Acadia. The coping stones, the stone bridge, and the informal planting no doubt made her feel at home when she visited Northwest Washington, D.C. I will end with this last bit of correspondence about the Day Mountain Road, the last Rockefeller built. The bulk of her work on the carriage road ceased in 1935 when she turned in her work car sign. The Day Mountain Loop was finished in the early 40s. There is some correspondence between them, however, in 1941. They struggled mightily to schedule a time for a ride over the Day Mountain Road, but due to what Rockefeller describes as a house full of children, grandchildren, and friends, he was unable to follow up on his initial invitations. She, in turn, was nursing her chief, as she called Dr. Farrand, and said, as you can well imagine, I like to be with him, rather than pleasantly gadding about the country with my friends. She added, perhaps next year you will again give me the opportunity of going with you, as I have looked forward to it, perhaps more than you know. The country was 2 years into World War II in 1941, hence the wistful tone in Rockefeller's assessment. Whatever happens in the world, Dame Mountain will be standing next summer, and I much hope we can drive up it then. 75 years later, after that letter was written, Dame Mountain and the rest of the Prairie Groves on Mount Desert Island are still here for us. Last, she shared a love of the place with her friends, inviting them here and encouraging their return. She wrote this letter to Robert and Mildred Wilson on Broken Hills after they visited. She explains that a sprig of white heather brings you to the place from whence you came, and adds, so I hope it will mean that before too long, you will be back here again, as you are greatly missed. What a lovely gesture. Would that we all had a friend like Trix, who would encourage us to return down here. Thank you for your attention and giving reason a reason.